that even the correct?
Should we go in the top one?
That,
Yeah, you're all good.
no, you're good.
No, that's good.
Alright.
Yeah, so this is the
Yeah.
takes the video, and then your audio is coming out of
Right
the
there.
gray one.
And that's the right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You can do it in either one. It just one, so just so you know, like which one's going to the camera and which one's going out to the channel.
Yeah.
But what's good about this is that you have your channel feed, and then you have your one that goes, so you can capture that separate. So if like if you need to make more adjustment or whatever, and also it's like a bit different because you're going through there and then you're going into that
Yeah.
audio level.
Yeah.
And like there was some weird thing, if it's too low, it like starts cutting out for some reason. But I don't think I have an issue with that.
That's fine. And then just go to
And is the card formatted into there?
Yeah, I think it was formatted.
Here, you wanna just set it, or did you do it here?
Well, it shows 0.
Okay, I think it might
Do you know
be,
how to like make sure?
yeah, yeah. So because I think it like so it fits with the file system. I don't think
Yeah,
it's
sure.
gotta be what you're doing. So you go to menu on the side, and then go down, or use these arrows to go to other functions. And then yeah, click on the other. Yes.
My parents have visited
And then
Yeah.
since Olson was born. They come to visit over there.
oh yeah.
Long stretch.
Okay. Do you have video though? So do you have the video?
Yeah. Yeah,
Great.
we're about like an hour and a half from where you were.
Testing, 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 testing.
Nailed it.
Yeah?
A lot of the names I still remember, but like
Okay.
application or it's getting a little muddled now.
Testing. Try it again.
Testing, 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 testing. Hello from Montpelier.
It went 45 but 50
Zach,
didn't mind it
are you getting that?
for my house growing
Yeah,
up.
just lower it. Okay.
Smart.
Yeah. I turned the gate up on that.
Yeah, the New York Times.
Yeah.
Super easy. And a lot of those would have been
Testing, testing,
baseball teams.
testing. 1, 2.
CBA and
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
my sister and I especially were like joking around. We were so close. But like it was
Testing,
so far
testing.
away my parents' house.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And my dad
5,
did
6,
stuff
7, 8, 9, 10,
all like
11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28.
coordinator of the Vermont Restorative Approaches Collaborative, which is a group of 40 plus trainers, community justice center folks, educators who are working with schools across the state with support from the AOE, a contract that we have with the AOE to support schools in moving towards a restorative approach. So, and you'll be learning more about that this evening.
I'm Ellingson, 9th grade.
I'm Ella Darcy, 9th grade.
I'm Marianne Songhurst, and I'm in 12th grade.
I'm Tracy Cesari, and I'm a senior.
I'm Micah Blomberg, and I'm also a senior.
Hi, good evening. I'm Lisa Noss. I'm one of the school counselors here at the high school. And I met Lindsay when I took her course last year. I got interested in restorative practices and learned most of what I know about it through her course.
And I'm Allie Kuhlman, she, her. I am the social worker at the Main Street Middle School.
Okay, so before we start this presentation, we just want to take a second to recognize that restorative practices has been around for centuries. In fact, we can't take full credit for it. It was actually developed from indigenous practices, so we just got to recognize and realize that first. And then, and kind of honor that too. Restorative practices is kind of an alternative practice of discipline, and we see it kind of as a transformative and repairing way to deal with repairing harm or damage to our school community. The approach is not just a program, but we must learn how to naturalize it into our system from foundation up. And it incorporates justice in all forms and positive change into institutions everywhere. And our quote is, restorative justice is a compass, not a map.
Okay, so when we think about restorative practices, we tend to say restorative practices when it comes to school communities. Restorative justice is oftentimes more referred to when we're talking about community justice, right? So in general, we're going to talk into the umbrella term of restorative practices. It really relies heavily upon relational kind of ecology, so how groups of people relate to one another within an environment, so in this case, within our school environment. Schools that have a strong relational ecology have a primary focus on relationships. And one of the things that we know about education, right, is that relationships build a really strong foundation for deep and real learning and experiences that stick with people as they grow through life. The strong trust between students, teachers, administrators, community members is a foundational piece of restorative practices, and I would venture to say also a piece that Montpelier-Roxbury Public Schools really values. It offers time and space to be heard, right? So a community that values the things that restorative practices values really offers that, which is something that I think oftentimes, especially in places like schools where hierarchies are a natural thing that are formed, time and space to be heard for youth is something that we don't always see in places like that. The shared power, especially allowing students the ability and the role in problem solving and change making is incredibly key to this, and you can see that you'll see as we continue on that the youth are going to speak a lot more than the adults here, and that's hugely important to us. And then last but certainly not least, I think kind of the overarching thing to remember here tonight is that there's a strong focus on social justice and equity, right? When people, especially youth, get what they need, right? We see them grow and blossom a lot more than when we prescribe the same thing for every kid. So I'm gonna turn the mic over.
So when we talk about restorative practices, we want to think about that there are 3 pillars. And the first pillar is that we are building and maintaining healthy relationships both between students and teachers and students. The second one is making sure that we have equitable learning environments, especially with the curriculum and the environment in the school. And the third one is repairing harm and transforming conflict. And restorative practices bring together people to understand why conflict occurs and why it should end.
Okay, so basically going off of that, there's a couple of things that kind of we need for a restorative school to work. So the first being that people can develop a sense of belonging. I think that really speaks to the kind of community aspect of restorative practices. If everyone is kind of being engaged in the learning environment and the circles, restorative practices will really be a lot more effective. And kind of along with that is the culture that we have to develop where everyone is able to kind of appreciate others and their intrinsic worth. So that's also kind of off of the community thing. I think that everyone needs to be able to respect each other for this system to really take off. And also there's the part about the interpersonal relationships that kind of come with this. So to really have a good community for this to work in, you need to have a place where people are really able to connect with one another, and that's I think that's really important. And along with that, with restorative practices, every student gets to add their voice. So I know there are a lot of people who get kind of marginalized in high school, and this is just kind of their opportunity to have everyone on a level playing field, and everyone can kind of say what they want to say, even if they wouldn't get that opportunity otherwise.
So at its core, it's really about paradigm shift in how we do things in schools. I think in like many of our systems in our society and organizations, things are done to and for people, but in a restorative practice or in a restorative approach, it's done with one another. And shouldn't that be the purpose of school? To be in relationship with one another so that we can be deeply engaged and successful. So this might, I don't know how familiar you all are with the multi-tier system of support, MTSS. So when we look at restorative practices and a restorative approach in school, it's like you can put this on top of that. And at the bottom, the foundation of that is the universal supports, what everyone receives in a school community. And without that strong community, time to build relationships and build that capacity through, and you can see in that box on the side, through a variety of different pieces that are already in place in your school system, or are the focus of many of our systems. If we don't have that foundation, then moving into the next tiers is not going to be as successful. So taking time to focus on the universal tier 1 supports is essential, and it really gets at the width of restorative practices. I heard mentioned earlier social emotional learning, and I know that's a focus for your district. And so that's one of those pieces. So it's looking at the things that are already in place and recognizing, hey, we're already doing a lot of the restorative practice work. How do we just think about it in a different way? So it's a change of mental models. At the same time, in Tier 1, there's a different way to respond when harm is done within a school system in regards to relationships and how relationships are repaired in a restorative approach. So I think we're going to get into that a little bit further along, but that might be through a different way to think about when something occurs, what's the language that is used, the restorative language and questions, and how are folks held accountable for their behavior in a way that is that allows them to not be shamed, but re-enter into their community in a supportive way. As you move further up, just like in a tier 2 support, those are like when you have interventions. So this is maybe when there's been harm done. What does that look like in a restorative model? So that might be a restorative circle, a conference, or peer mediation. So instead of, and we'll get to the why later on, but instead of pushing out and removing kids from a classroom, it's bringing them back in. And then finally, if there is situations where harm is done and folks need to take time away from school, how do we welcome them back into a school community and have a process that truly reintegrates them and they understand what supports they have, but they're also held accountable for their actions. So same sort of, same structure as the MTSS structure, but without that foundational piece of I bet if you went down that list, you could say, check, check, we're doing a lot of that already in our school system. Without those pieces and spending more time and focus and energy on those, arts integration could be one of those, you're not going to be able to really think about how to resolve conflict in a different way.
I was a 9th grader, so last year I was an 8th grader, and I was the oldest grade to take part in the MSMS, the middle school's approach on restorative circles. Last year we, last year we took part in like community-based groups, and our TAs are 20 minutes in the morning where we talked. And the idea was to build a community, like a sense of community. And for my TA,
well, each TA was given like a specific format for the circle, and they didn't take any student input in making those questions or thinking about what maybe we'd like to talk about, and I think that was kind of what ruined it for us, and it would have been a better experience if they had taken our input. My TA did later in the year after we started, came up with her own questions that interested us, and that made it a lot more enjoyable, and we wanted to participate in it.
Yeah, if it was done to us, or if it was done, with us instead of to us, as like having our own questions, being like taking our input, I think it would have gone smoother, because I remember when I would get done with these Friday circles, I was like just lamenting it, because we were given these questions that really had there was no reason for us to want to care about them. And if we did this correctly, it would bring a sense of like caring about everyone and everything around us.
So I'll just quickly talk a little bit about the middle school's journey thus far from the adult perspective. 2 summers ago, a team from the middle school attended the BEST Institute, focusing specifically on restorative practices. As I think many of you know, the BEST Institute has kind of a track for MTSS stuff, and then a track for restorative practices stuff. We went to the restorative side, and we essentially came up with a 3 to 5 year implementation plan where we were attempting to do some kind of community building first. One of the main things we really got from John Kidda's presentation over the 4 days was that building the community, building that tier 1 kind of part of the triangle is foundational, obviously, to being able to really build a restorative practice within a school community. So some of the things that we had been planning to focus on over the first few years was implementing an extended TA on Fridays to do restorative circles. We continue to do that this year. There was a committee that met, a committee of teachers, and the plan was to include students this year. It's kind of fallen apart, to be perfectly frank. They were meeting, we were meeting every week last school year, and the hope is to be able to kind of use some restorative conferencing, the tier 2 and tier 3, within our discipline system. I think that right now that is kind of where the plan stands. I will just say, and we'll get to this a little bit later, that it becomes really difficult when it's just like a few teachers or a few people really interested in this, and it's not kind of a systems-wide approach. So we'll get to that though in a little bit.
And I'm going to explain what we've been doing at the high school with restorative practices. So last year I had a half sabbatical because I had a Roland Fellowship, and I was researching and learning all about how to bring more wellness practice and intentional focus on that for our students, both from a mental health perspective but also a community, social, relational perspective. And I came across through a workshop with John Kidda, restorative practices, knowing nothing about it. And that's how I learned about Lindsay and signed up for her class. And the big emphasis in her class is it's youth-adult partnership, so that you're not doing to, but you're doing with. That's how these students got involved. Simultaneously, my colleague, Aaliyah Cohen, who couldn't be here tonight because she's not feeling well, but she also was getting interested and excited about this. And she went in a different direction. We have since aligned our efforts, but what she was doing was she contacted a woman named Bianca who works for, it's a collaboration between DCF and Washington County Diversion Program, and they got a grant or something to go out to schools to educate them about how restorative practices work and what they are. And so Bianca came and she trained our faculty. She came 3 times, if I remember correctly. Once just to give a broad overview, kind of like explaining this and what the different elements of restorative practices are. And then the next 2 times, she worked with faculty members who were particularly jazzed about the subject and trained us to lead circles. And so in 2 separate faculty meetings, 2 or 3, I can't remember, we led circles with our faculty. And the first 2 were, the focus was on community building. The third one, we actually used circle discussion to deliberate about a pretty big question that we were all focused on. It had to do with cell phone use and what direction were we going to take with that within the high school. So that was our experience with circles last year. And that pretty much sums it up. That's the last piece for that slide.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to talk about a little bit more
Oh, yeah.
about the planning room and
Alright, so Lisa invited me and a couple other students to come to 4 full-day conferences with Lindsay, where we learned about restorative practices and youth-adult partnerships. And then we presented to the NHS teachers at a morning meeting about restorative practices and circle and how we should implement them into our school. And then we met with the planning room about effective language, which is language that makes sure that when there is a conflict, it's not accusative tone and no one feels like they're being attacked or accused.
So that was the what, and now we want to talk about the why. So this is not, as you saw in that first slide, I think that Mary Ann shared, that it's not an initiative or a program, and it's not like the next fad. I think that this surge of interest nationally, globally, and in Vermont is in response to what we're seeing in schools and the needs of our young people in regards to social, emotional health and well-being and learning, and quite frankly, the disciplinary data around suspensions and expulsions. So Vermont actually in 2016 passed H95, which asked the AOE to explore the use of restorative practices regarding school climate and culture, truancy, bullying, and harassment, and school discipline. So it's been recommended to all schools, school districts, SUs to consider a restorative approach before any kind of exclusionary discipline practice. With that, there's been a huge amount of learning and interest and collaboration in Vermont. Like I said, there's this Vermont Restorative Approaches Collaborative for supporting schools across the entire state that are looking at that are exploring restorative practices and a restorative approach, and then looking at implementation, which we know, according to implementation science and lessons learned along the way, that it takes a good 3 to 5 years to truly be a restorative school and to shift practices. It's practices and procedures. It's also curriculum and pedagogy and every level. So it's not just about discipline. It's about really exploring what it means to be a restorative school and environment. And so this really came out of this response to the zero tolerance policies, which we know have not really helped our young people at all. In fact, as Mary Ann will share in just a moment, created what I'm sure you've heard, the school to prison pipeline. And so maybe that's what I'll do. I'll turn it over to you now, your experience.
So last February, I got a chance to go attend a workshop with Lindsay. It was in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and we got the chance to learn from the Pallonji Restorative Justice Program. And it's basically a youth-led program that was really awesome, and they had a lot of community support. And it was primarily made up of students of color, specifically like the Hispanic students who made up the majority of the school district. It was also founded on youth power and youth voice, so it was completely youth-led. I'll reiterate that again and again. And it was really awesome to see that they had completely changed how the institution handles systemic discipline and had basically transformed and reformed the system altogether. And their school to prison pipeline system, like with suspensions and expulsions before this program became like full on implemented, it was pretty high, and they managed to decrease the amount of students who get stuck in that cycling system. And it was really cool because these students are paid to be part of this program group, and they undergo extensive training, and they organize events like this where they get a lot of people from all throughout northern states to come see and observe their workshops and how they are able to do this. So I thought that was pretty cool because it showed it wasn't just Vermont who was interested in this, it was also another state pretty close to us, Massachusetts, and it's also a national thing too.
And then also the reasons why we should continue restorative practices and even pay more attention to it at our schools is because it can reduce hierarchy and show respect for everyone, and could be helpful with building relationships between students and teachers, and make a more respectful environment and inclusive environment overall.
And then finally, just to give you a little more reason why we think it's a good idea, restorative approaches have been linked in amongst other schools that are using them to, and Marianne touched on this in her experience at Pallonji, but reduce suspensions and expulsions, behavior referrals, racial disparities and exclusionary discipline. It's been linked to teacher satisfaction and reduced turnover in their jobs. Students have identified increased academic performance and social emotional capacity, and that's a big focus in the district right now. Generally improved climate and culture, reduced absenteeism and tardiness, and an overall parental satisfaction increase.
All right, future direction. So one of the things this group discussed a lot in our course that we took last year together, as well as in our meetings this year, is just integrating restorative practices into staff development district-wide. Something that we all feel really strongly about, and kind of the research shows, is that when an effort is made K-12, students know what to expect. They feel a part of the community from beginning to end. If we can find a way to train staff in a really meaningful way, we also believe that they will feel a lot more comfortable in like really diving into this with students. Part of the struggle right now, I think we've found, is that it's hard to put yourself out there and to feel a little bit vulnerable in these moments, and that's what's so important for adults to model how to do if we're expecting kids to be able to increase their kind of social emotional literacy. So K-12, please.
I just want to reiterate that I think the most important thing is having the students and the teachers together with this. A biggest thing was last year is that wasn't there. It was just something that they were doing to us. This needs to be something that is like a whole school. Every person who steps in the doors each day needs to be a part of it.
And again, what Ali said, if the staff isn't on board with it, it's going to reflect back on the students' view of it, and that's really important. Also, we need to focus on tier 1, which is building community and connections before we can move on to anything else, because having a good foundation is the most important part of this whole sort of practices.
And so the point we really want to make sure resonates with you is that this is not just some phase that the school is going through. This is something that will truly last, and we really believe will make the community a better place.
And we welcome any questions you may have.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was excellent. Questions? Bridget?
A couple of you talked a little bit about your experiences at the middle school, but what's the experience like for students at the high school with restorative practices? sounded more like that the faculty is working on things, but I was wondering what the students are experiencing.
Do you want to answer that and then I can answer?
We don't really do a lot, to be honest. We try to have sometimes some TA on something, but it's really, we don't have anything that's what's wrong. And it's, I think, in the planning room, it's more apparent, you know, Jen and Lucy Siri and Matt Nice, they are doing a really good job of being caring and making sure that they are not just disciplining these kids, but as an overall community, there's not much going on, which we need to change.
I would agree with that and add that it's just in the infancy stages of we, the faculty, are just learning about it, and so we have not fully implemented it into the students' regular day. But that's why we're getting students involved to get their input on where they can imagine that happening. You know, I have my ideas, but I want to know where they think it would fit. So we're just getting started with that.
I think there was one instance.
Could you talk to
I think
the
there was
microphone?
one instance last year of a tier 2 circle that happened when there was a disciplinary issue in the health room. I don't remember the specifics, but what I'm trying to say is that it has existed here before, and I think that it could definitely take off easily.
You reminded me of another thing. So earlier in the year, we were asked to address our students' PLP goals. So everybody has a TA on the faculty. And are you all familiar with what TA is? The Teacher Advisory Group. Okay. So within TA, we were given an array of options of how we wanted to check in with our students about how they were, the progress they were making toward their goals. And one of the options was you could do it as a circle. And different faculty members had different levels of comfort with that. And just anecdotally, in my TA, surprise, we did a circle. And I will tell you the difference, I already had a pretty tight-knit TA, but the difference between the feel of my TA from the day before we did a circle to the day after, and even they commented on it, saying like, wow, that was really cool, and I wasn't so sure I wanted to share my goal with everybody, but I did, and it was fine, and it really was, it was a moving TA session, at least in my experience. Oh, and then the 1 to 5 years, we should mention.
Yeah, well, yeah, so, I think I had stated before that, of course, it takes time to completely change, because it is a paradigm change for a system. And I was thinking just from my own personal experience, I was an educator in Essex for 15 years. And we went through a whole school restorative approach, but it was very grassroots. And we know that when there's a few people that are really passionate about something and then those few people might leave to go elsewhere, what happens is it's not systemic. So you haven't really created that foundation, there's only pockets. And what I'm hearing and what I know from working with this team is that there's pockets because there are people that have interest in it. What I would say is that, as Lissa stated, that, or maybe Liz Alley saying what's next with the future is that it's really important that everyone has a foundation. The what and the why, what are restorative, and once they realize that there's already so many things in their toolbox that are restorative, like so in our work we always start with like, well, what are the strengths, what are the things that are already happening? Those are restorative approaches. But how are we going to be more intentional about making sure that happens, not just in TA, but that is a place to do it, sitting in a circle, but how are we going to look at curriculum choices, like where do youth have a voice in their curriculum, in their learning, in school discipline approaches. It has to be done in partnership and with the youth at the table, and all people need to be involved in the work. So I've done a lot of trainings this year with, which is not really, the work of our organization Up for Learning is youth adult partnership, but I have done some work with some schools that are every adult that works in that system being trained in what it is and why. So that's everyone from the cafeteria staff to the custodial staff to the administrative staff to teaching staff to support staff coming together. It really needs to be systemic, and then it does take time. So we always look at year one as an exploration year of really getting our feet wet, learning about it, digging in a little bit, trying things out. And then the next couple years are around like partial implementation, and then really 3 to 5, like any change can occur in an organization, it takes a good 3 to 5 years. So it does take time, and I think it's a worthwhile investment. I know it's a worthwhile investment. I've seen the success in many places. There's schools that are close by. There's many schools in Vermont that are digging into this work all over the state and then nationally as well. But it does take time, and it really does take buy-in. I mean, that's a huge piece of it, is that there needs to be buy-in and to build capacity.
Just wanted to give a couple more things that are happening at the Main Street Middle School. There are a number of teachers who do feel really interested and invested in this kind of way of being as an educator, and so a good number of teachers have used circles in academic settings. I think it's really important to note that the idea of student voice, obviously, we know can be used in more places than just disciplinary settings or community building settings. So academic circles are something that a lot of teachers use. I know that Lindsay used them when she was a teacher. There have been teachers from 5 to 8 in the Main Street Middle School who use them as like reflective kind of exercises after a unit, a warm-up during a unit. There's a number of academic ways to use them. I can tell you that just as a social worker, shock of shocks, I've used a lot of circles in my work. But also there have been a few kind of bigger kind of group harm situations that have occurred in the middle school, and we've come together in this circle to kind of address it. And the feedback I get from students is that that's the first time that anyone's like asked me to share with a group of people how I felt after something terrible happened to me, rather than just sharing it with the assistant principal or with the teacher or with one person, with one adult. Students being heard when they've been harmed is incredibly empowering. The other thing that I'll just mention quickly is that I kind of put together and helped to facilitate this county-wide Restorative Practices PLC, so professional learning community. So it's district-wide. So we have we've got like 5 or 6 schools that come together once a month, and we discuss kind of like where we are in the journey, and we problem solve together. So there are a number of schools in Washington County and all over Vermont, but specifically in Washington County, who are really working hard towards this. And I think we have a much larger community that we can draw from and learn from.
I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you all. Really dynamic and effective and collaborative way to convey a message. Very powerful. Question is for you, Libby. So, not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot. So, are there any plans in place at the administrative level to help facilitate the expansion of these practices?
Yeah, so Mary touched on it when she presented to you all, a month ago? 2 board meetings ago, in the sense of we have to get our ducks in a row first, in terms of we need a SEL district-wide group, so we came together as an administrative team just last week to put together who do we want on that team. And principals are now touching people's shoulders to say, hey, you're going to be on this. These that we have meeting dates set and that kind of thing. Now we're gathering the team run by Mary. That team will be responsible for coming up with a common data system, coming up with a common understanding of what we mean when we say STL learning, common understanding of what our K-12 vertical articulated curriculum is around that. And then working towards, this is the recommendation we're making district-wide for the work to be done. So we have some pieces to put in place prior to jumping whole hog. I think Alyssa and Allie, and certainly Lindsay from her statewide perspective, hit on how that we have some adults in our system who are interested in this work. We do not have all adults who are interested in this work. And so we have a lot of work to do around what is it that we truly need, what does Tier 1 look like, what are we expecting our kids to know and be able to do prior to some of this, which connects to exactly what Lindsay was saying. She says, what are you doing now? That's restorative work. It's just naming it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Good night, thank you.
Drive safe.
Excellent.
Students.
Yes. Well, students and adults.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think we're.
Is Grant using it?
No, I don't think he is. He just has copies.
Did you already present?
No.
Did this consume a bunch of time? At the beginning?
So we have with us tonight two student representatives who are going to be with us for the rest of the school year. You all know Hope, who just got into Columbia.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's like deja vu all over again.
I know.
I just heard that.
Yeah, I did get into Columbia. Thank you. Have a safe
Like
drive
a
home.
Columbia seat on the board.
I know. And we'd like to welcome Eve Taylor. And Eve is a junior at Montpelier High School. And so the idea we wanted to try to get at the beginning, but Ms. Hope is a little busy, is to have a senior and a junior on the board. So then the senior can mentor the junior, and then the junior can mentor the senior. Or switch it up next year. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I'm not sure, did you all plan something to talk about, or we met the other day, but I wasn't sure. Okay, go for it.
So I understand that the consent agenda and public comment and first part of learning focus is taken up sometime, so I don't want to take up much more time. But we do have a pretty short, just structure, student celebrations, and then student concerns, needs, and perspectives. So it's similar to last year. And then in terms of student celebrations, which is what we'll start off with, the marking period has just begun, but we're about to go off for break, and so there's sort of a little bit of a lull, and some seniors, me, are hearing back about college, some are applying, and the juniors are prepping for second semester junior year, which is a busy time with standardized testing and AP classes in general. So that's happening, and in preparation for winter holiday break, student council is holding an ugly sweater contest this Friday. Winter sports have started.
Yeah, so Grease auditions have happened for our spring musical, and it's one of the largest ensembles that the mask theater program has had in the high school, so it's great to see that more students are getting interested in being involved in the arts program. Club Interact is holding a Toy Joy drive in order to get more connected with the community. It's basically just, we have shoe boxes and we're filling it with items for Heaton Woods, Westview Meadows, and families involved with the Meals on Wheels program. And yeah, do you want to talk about the concerns?
Yeah, so just to add on to celebrations, Winter Ball just happened, and that raises money for Project Grad. The French class is fundraising for their spring trip to Montreal and Quebec, and they did so by making and selling crepes at the Garage Cultural Center, which is this new cool spot in town, and other MHS faculty and staff were part of the, I think it was centered around bees. There was this kind of craft fair, so it was a whole community effort. And then the middle school play just happened, and as we've heard from some parents, it was a huge success. And then in terms of student concerns and needs and student perspectives, this continues from last year, just the idea of like what are our continued efforts to support diversity and inclusion in MRPS schools. And I think that it relates to what we've heard tonight about restorative practices, and that's something that Emma and I bumped a lot last year, just in terms of knowing that we already have some tenets of restorative practices in our community already, and I think that's what makes it so dynamic and special. And I think that as a relatively smaller set of schools, we have the privilege of having the opportunity to have a sense of community that large schools, especially in big cities, don't necessarily have. And it's an opportunity that we can make the most of, and part of the reason why restorative practices haven't been as developed in the high school is because when presenting a sort of initiative that changes the way that schools work and changes the way that relationships are formed and held between students and teachers, it's often good to get good first impressions. Otherwise, community members will sort of withdraw and then not want to re-engage. So I think that it's especially in other communities, like U32's tried it, and what experience has shown is that spending time developing and working on tiers for the first year and the second year and the third year and so on and so forth is really, really pivotal to ensuring that restorative practices are successful. But I think that like part of what has helped me feel so dedicated to my community and part of like why I serve on the board and why I'm so involved in the community is because I just feel connected to it, essentially. And I think that restorative practices can help ensure that more students feel connected to their school environments, because we spend like 6 hours a day here, and some less, some more, but we spend a huge amount of our time at school, and so it's a huge part of our lives, and so it would be a really positive force if students felt even more connected and even more happy here and didn't view their teachers just as authority figures or distant people trying to like impose something on them, but as friends and confidants and supporters. And let's see. With the equity policy and the equity specialist and the district-wide equity committee, I am a member of the Racial Justice Alliance, and we are happy that there's an open position for a student member on that committee, just because it's important to get student voice in all areas of decision making, and it'll help make better policy. And I think especially with something like equity, it's really important to hear student perspective. So it's also just a chance to uphold a sense of transparency with students and the student body about what the committee is working on and how the policy is being implemented. And Earth Group is in the process of meeting with administration, and I know they're going to be in touch with the school board and Libby in the coming weeks, especially after we get back from break, for this project that I can say we because I'm part of Earth Group, that we've developed, and it is the idea of a food forest in the mud lot, because something that it's basically an initiative to mitigate stormwater runoff into the Winooski, which is a problem, and it's already a problem because of agriculture near the river and near the river valley, and it would be basically shrubbery and berry bushes and fruit and nut trees, as well as a place for students to hang out. There would be pathways and benches, and there's also obviously the concern about keeping the fire lane open, and obviously that would be in the design of it, but it's essentially to make sure that stormwater runoff doesn't go into the Winooski River, along with a lot of the like, I don't know how to explain it, but like from cars, and a lot of the like debris and pollution and litter doesn't go into the river, and also just a chance to have a beautiful space for students and a chance to grow food for the cafeteria. So I know that students are meeting with Renee DeVore, and they're going to hope to present to the school board in the next few weeks about it. That's pretty much it, but we're here to answer questions you may have, and obviously in the next few months about proficiency-based learning and behavior and class sizes and anything like that. So we're here. We're here for you. Yeah.
We're glad you're back.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ebony. We're excited to have you for the rest of the year.
Thank you.
We appreciate the commitment too.
Questions for Opening?
Great, thanks. Budget.
Fun stuff.
Well, this might actually have a chance of getting it right back on schedule, because there's not much to give you an update on.
You like that?
It's good and bad news. If you could just take one and pass them to the middle, please. So, instead of showing slides, I just wanted to put something together real quick to serve as a quick update. The first bullet talks about follow-up items. So at the last budget presentation, I was asked to compare actual tax rates to the tax rates that we showed during town or informational hearings to see what the differences are. And I was also asked to look at the enrollment projection for FY20 versus what the enrollment actually was for FY20. So if you turn to the second page, that's the follow-up piece. So that first section is talking about, I didn't leave Roxbury off for any other reason other than there was no change between the tax rate that was presented on information hearing and the vote because of the 5% limitation. So I just focused on Montpelier. So what you see is last year, the actual tax rate was actually about 0.3 cents higher than the informational hearing. But that was an anomaly. The year before that, the voters basically passed a budget that was 6.5 cents higher in a tax rate than what the actual tax rate ended up at. The year before that, it was 4.7 cents higher than what the actual rate was. So that's just a little bit of a snapshot of how things go, because there's a tax commissioner recommendation on things like dollar yield early in the process, and by the time everything sugars off and the legislature sets the dollar yield, it can be dramatically different. Then the enrollment projection versus actuals, so you can see that going the columns across K through 12, and then the projection, what it was, the actual enrollment, the difference, and then I did the difference by grade cluster. And so what jumped out at me obviously was the kindergarten number being so dramatically off, and then I realized I went back to the formulas and realized it was pulling from 4 years ago's birth data instead of 5 years ago. If I had done it correctly, that number would have been 66 instead of 88. Huge difference in birth data from 1 year to the next. The other thing that jumps out is grade 12. Looks like that was off dramatically. But as I looked at the formulas there, for the past at least 4 years, we've dropped kids from 11th to 12th grade every year. If there were 80 kids the next year in 11th grade, the next year there'd only be 76 in 12th grade. Not sure what that out-migration is, but we usually drop kids from 11th to 12th. This past year, we actually picked up 6. So instead of a typical loss of 6 or 7, we picked up 6. So that's why that was there. So the kind of good news is the only place I found any kind of error in the formula was in kindergarten. So if you turn the page again, this is the new enrollment projection slide. So you could compare this to the budget presentation on the 4th to see the difference. What you really see is in the 2021 column for kindergarten, that number was 73, now it's 71. And then you'll see that kind of waterfall down. In FY 21-22, it's kindergarten and first that's a little bit different, and then it's kindergarten first, second, kindergarten first, second, third. So that first kind of triangle in the upper right-hand corner are the numbers that are a little bit lower on this chart than they were. The bottom line totals, we still are seeing increasing enrollment all the way through 22-23, but it's just not as high. Like the number I think used to be in 22-23, the total K-12 I think was 1165, now it's still 1150. So it's not as high, but it is still increasing. So that slide will now be part of the budget presentation, this updated enrollment slide. But if you go back to the first page now, changes since December 4th. What I usually tell you is anything that I changed in the budget from one budget presentation to the next. There's not a lot. Tax factors, the only thing we know now is the non-residential base rate. And that's got to still be set by law, but at least we have a good guess. We do have the dollar yield recommendation, but I'm not using it yet because of that swing that we sometimes see through the legislative process. Enrollment projections, obviously I changed those, and we just talked about that. No changes on revenues, no significant changes in revenues, but on the expense side, you'll see there it's highlighted there was a $0 net change. There were several places where I could collect in some savings, but Mary Lundeen let Libby and I know that she's now got some new information about some kids that are coming into district that we're going to have to worry about for potential outside placement costs. So instead of reducing the budget, I put that money in the last line for special ed outside placements to make sure that we don't end up with a deficit. I also had to cover the lacrosse coach that we added. And then personnel changes, it's hard to explain this, but this year, if we had somebody shift positions, it may have led to a difference in what I budgeted versus what they come in at. Like, for example, bless you. If I had a custodian that was part-time that's now filling a full-time job, I may have budgeted less money for that full-time job, and now I'm having to pay that higher rate. So because of a few changes like that in personnel in FY20, that kind of pushes over into FY21. So I had to create a little bit of extra money there. A through E are just places where I was able to reduce the budget some. The school resource officer, as you know, we have a new one. So there's a new higher savings, in essence, that gets passed along to us from the city. Dental vision, I had assumed that we were gonna have a small rate increase for dental vision. Turns out both rates are level. So unlike health, both rates were level. So whenever I rolled that in, we had a little bit of savings there. Statewide health negotiations, I know in some districts it's a big expense. For us, whenever we actually roll it in, it actually is a reduction from what we had originally budgeted. Grandparented tuition for Roxbury high school students. I had a placeholder for about a half of a student in case we had like somebody who was a tech student switch from tech to regular high school, because then I would have to pay regular high school tuition. But we just don't have the flexibility to budget for a bunch of contingencies, so I just took that out. High school testing materials, this was actually kind of an oversight on my part. We increased that to allow for AP tests to be paid for by the district. We intended for that only to be for us to pay for AP tests for kids on free and reduced lunch, because we don't have a high percentage of FRL kids taking these tests. So this was kind of to help alleviate that. That amount of money is way less than if we were paying for all AP tests. So that's why that reduction is there. So there's a reduction of about $52,000, but I realigned it into those other areas for now. The next section, still unknowns. Equalized pupil count, we did get a first draft of equalized pupils, but our numbers are definitely not right. So we still are on hold for that. Common level of appraisal, I think Libby mentioned last year we got it December 24th. I haven't seen it yet, but it should be soon. Special ed revenues should have been out on the 15th. I still haven't seen them. But those are big things that hopefully we'll get between now and January 8th when we have a full-fledged budget update. So I guess my question is, as I learn some of these unknowns and roll them in, my question to the board is listed under discussion. Do you have any kind of target you want me to try to hit, or you want us to try to hit? Right now, spending per pupil is an increase of 4.36%. Our education spending is an increase of 4.77 now, I think. The residential tax rate for Montpelier is going up 5.34%, which is 8.8 cents, I think. So if there's any of those kinds of, any targets that you have in mind for any of those areas, I can try to keep that in mind. I won't promise, because if the factors go the wrong direction, there's just no way to be able to hit them. But if there is an idea that, hey, we want spending per pupil to only be an increase of 4%, something like that, then we can keep that in mind whenever we crunch through it between now and January 8th. Any thoughts?
My general thought is that these outstanding items are really very large unknowns that could sway things pretty drastically one way or another. And I feel like this is just me speaking, the way that I see it is if we make a decision now and then it swings in a positive direction, and we've made, a decision, we're trying to stick to a certain line, it's kind of arbitrary at that point. Whereas when we have more information and we know what the liability will look like for Montpelier taxpayers, I feel like we'll be able to make more informed decisions. We know what's being added, and I don't think, we necessarily will need.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, we're kind of persistently in this position of, these three big factors from the state. don't come in time, so, yeah.
How-
We're generally stuck with a situation where we have to make guesstimates, and, Grant, I think, does a very good job of being conservative on those estimates, so that we don't have, we've generally been surprised, not too wildly, and more often than not, positively.
So-
Michelle?
The AOE by statute is required to give us the equalized pupil number by December 1st.
I believe it is December 1st, yeah.
And that hasn't been happening.
No, but they would be quick to say, there's fingers pointing every direction here.
Yep.
Last year was the first year with that new Vermont statewide data management system, SDDMS or something like that. SLDS. Oh, mine is SSD. SLDS. So there was a lot of problems with the AOE being able to get data from all the districts and supervisory unions. So we would say it's because the system was bad. AOE would say it's because we didn't get the data in time. I would say that same argument pertains this year. We would still say there's problems with the system that makes it very difficult to get our information in, but the AOE would say we can't give you data unless we have your data. So we're still in the same place we were last year.
And what's the AOE doing to fix it?
We'll
Ask
talk about
Secretary
that
French.
off camera.
Well,
Okay then.
I ask because you may remember that I'm now representing our region on the VSBA board, and someone from a different district has raised this complaint, and so we're sort of weighing how.
I am there with you, Michelle, this year. Let me try to say this in a good way.
Diplomatically.
Yes, thank you. This year is not necessarily the AOE's fault, from our perspective. In other districts, yes, it is. I'll blame the AOE. But
Montpelier-Roxbury was not speaking.
because of a change in the data management position, and because of some decisions that were made prior to the new data management and technology director being in their position, that was unbeknownst to us, our Power School wasn't updated. And and when we tried, our new data manager, when he tried to update it, it would look like it was updated, and then it would revert back to like Power School 3. And because it had been told to do that by former employees. So we couldn't figure out why. So we've hired.
So we had our own technology problems.
Yes. So we've hired an outside consultant to fix that for us. However, he just uncovered this because it was so deep in Power School. And so we're paying a lot of money for him to fix our system. And so this one is on us. But yes, the rollout was awful. No, there's not a lot of support at the AOE for this rollout. Yeah, their system kind of stinks. However, this one's on us completely. So we're in a little bit of a weird predicament around that right now.
Yeah, but sped revenues, I think, are supposed to also be provided by, I don't know if it's statutory, but by December 15th. I know that one of the reasons why you weren't voting on announced tuition is because one of the factors I use is the allowable tuition from last year to kind of gauge where we are. We don't have the allowable tuition from last year yet. Once again, that is by statute. I think that we're supposed to have that by now. And that would be another one where people are pointing in both directions. I'm pointing at the AOE because my data's in. Why can't I get my allowable tuition? The AOE's pointing back saying, yeah, well, yours is, but not everybody else's is, and so we can't crunch the numbers. So there's a few things like that. But yeah, I would say last year that the equalized pupil thing was probably more on them. This year it's probably more on us.
Specifically us, not districts in general.
Right.
There's a few that have issues, but we're in the minority there. I've got no problem with, not having a target. I just wanted to make sure that I was sensitive to that if you had one. I know that this year it is a big ask. I mean, there are positions that aren't nice to have, they're must-haves. You know, classroom teacher at the middle school, we have to based on the class sizes. The fact that we don't have a behavior person at the middle school, we have to do that. There's lots of things we'd love to do, but there are unfortunately a lot of things that we have to do, which is already putting us at a higher rate of increase than we typically have. So, anyway, anything else?
Tina was first.
Tina.
I was just gonna say, well, you know that I might say, I certainly don't want it to go up, but I'm with Andrew that I don't know how you could say anything yet.
Too much unknown.
You know, I thought that the first presentation of the budget was excellent, and we had a good discussion of the things that we would really love to have and are not in the budget, so it's clear that the budget that you presented was designed to address really significant needs in the district, and in fact is not addressing everything that we could probably address. So I'm certainly not suggesting that anyone would go back and try to cut the budget at this point. I think we just have to wait and see how the numbers come out.
Okay. Well, January 8th, hopefully we have all the pieces we need to be able to make some good decisions then.
I forget the date when we need to have everything finalized by.
What's that?
When do we have to have everything finalized by for the voters?
So January.
January.
The 24th.
It's late January, isn't it?
Yeah, there's like a 30-day window, and I didn't.
Well, it's before the city council meeting, the second city council meeting in January. Is that still the case, or are we so separate from them now that
We're
it's not?
separate from
Separate.
separate.
What
We're
we have
separate, but
in
our
our work
articles-
plan is that the next meeting is the public forum, so Grant will do a larger presentation, then the 15th is, I have budget approval in our work plan, so.
Is there the window there on when it has to be published?
Yeah, actually, I think you may have put that in there, Grant. Budget info meeting, parentheses, this needs to be done, or this needs to be before town meeting day on 3/3/20, probably 3/2/20.
Okay.
So that's not when it's.
No, you have to get it in the book.
It
Yeah,
has to get on the.
No, you don't have that in here
I
then.
don't have it, okay. There is a window of time that the annual reports have to be out.
Yeah.
And I know that Montpelier's
And the
already asked me
ballots have to
about,
be
hey, do you have your audit report for us to put the segment in there about the audit? So I can get back to you on
Okay.
what that period is, but it's not as so much a period for us because we're dependent on Roxbury having our articles in their, in amongst their articles and our information being in the Montpelier annual report, so we're hitting their windows within that window. But I can send you something on what that window of time is.
Could be helpful for us if we are faced with difficult decisions.
And Michelle's raised a good question. I don't think we need to report to the city, but whether.
We didn't last year.
Yeah, we did last year.
So it's just a matter of getting it before the books close.
Yeah, we get our articles to them so that they can put it in there and have the vote and everything, but yeah, it'll be just our own information hearing.
Thanks for all your work on this.
Yeah, any other questions for Grant? Thank you, Grant.
Great, thank you. Have a good night, be safe.
Thanks, Grant, drive safe.
Superintendent, is the RSV support staff data coordinator, is that?
RVS support staff, strike that from the agenda. I did not get the information I needed from the building leader there, so we're gonna strike that for right now. It may come back on a different agenda. The MHS data coordinator position, you saw that in the budget for next year. It's the .5 position for guidance support. In talking to the guidance department and Renee here, they have asked if we could put that into the budget now, from fund balance, because of the SLDS challenges, that the person who is doing that role is focusing solely on state data-wide systems, and the guidance team needs somebody helping them with scheduling, and needs to learn that process from somebody who knows how to do it, which Matt could help with that. So they've asked if we could put that into the budget now, so that, or we could have money for it now for the remainder of the school year, so they could get somebody in place, train them through the spring and scheduling for next year, or that's gonna be a huge task that I'm not positive right now who would do it and who has the knowledge base to do it. So if we got them in early, Matt could take some of his time to help train somebody in Power School and how to do that piece. And then that person could do the scheduling for the following year for our students.
On the nuts and bolts front, do we have any idea what the cost of that is and what that is in relation to the fund balance at present?
I believe it's like $15,000 to $20,000. And Grant is well aware. I should have had him stay. I'm sorry. He's well aware of this and is believes we have the fund balance to do that.
Okay. Are we looking to hire a new person, or is this having another person who's currently on staff take on this task?
It's to hire a new person, to hire the 0.5 early, essentially.
Okay.
That is in next year's budget.
Okay.
So are we planning to vote on that next time, or when are we, what's the plan for that?
The budget is a
The
whole.
0.5.
We don't have an amount, so we can't
Yeah.
approve the fund balance transfer.
Yeah, no, we can't do it right now. We need more information.
Great, come back. Can you go run and grab Grant? Sorry.
You might, as you're running, tell them we need that number.
Yeah. Well, a couple numbers.
Yeah.
We can do the supervision evaluation again. Oh, here's Grant. Oh, he's just telling me the window to post the budget warning is January 23rd for February 2nd. Come back.
Wait, did you say it's January 23rd to February 2nd?
Yes.
Okay, so February 2nd is when we have until.
Yes.
Okay.
But the municipalities are usually looking for our info at the beginning of the period.
Yeah.
That's
To
okay.
get everything printed, and every other town is asking the printer to get their stuff printed.
I'm just.
Actually, an interesting thing that I learned from other school districts is that they finalize their contracts prior to finalizing their budgets.
Such pressure, Michelle. Sorry.
I've never heard of such a thing, but other people are really stressed about it, so.
Do we want to do I just told them what we needed.
Okay, yeah, let's go to the superintendent evaluation, and we'll have to interrupt that programming for a second to get some notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't really have a presentation for you around the mid-year progress update. I put it together and give you a chance to ask any questions you want to ask. I'm open to anything.
Questions about the superintendent evaluation?
I have a question, but I have a comment. My first comment is I love the learning focuses. So I learn something every time. Okay. So thank you for that. I think it's a good part of the budget, and I think I've always thought it's part of the superintendent's job to educate for it. You're doing a good job. And my other thing has to do with next steps. I was trying to figure out what section this is in. Community Public Relations section. And I was looking at your next steps and looking at 2 to say, yep, I'm concerned too about how you get people here, but I think it's important to do. So I don't know what the rest of the board thinks about that. And we've talked before about how do we develop a gauge for what parents think. I don't have an answer, I'm just saying.
I don't know if I would do it bi-monthly. I think that might be really discouraging.
Right, yeah.
To you, given the attendance.
Did your mentor suggest that strategy? Were there other superintendents doing that, or was that just an idea that
No, it's just an idea.
We did have a series called Soup with the Super, and I think it might have been monthly, and parents could come in and meet with the superintendent. And I went to one, and I was one of 2 parents, and I'm on the board, so I didn't.
or something,
Yeah.
saying things with the principal to get people in, and I know it always takes time. It's a build-up, it's like, you have to persist. But I agree, not bi-monthly.
Yeah. And principals have a different end. There's a different desire for a parent to see a principal than see a superintendent.
Yes.
But even that's hard for principals.
No,
sometimes.
yeah, I know.
So that's why I was saying it would take, I think, working at it.
Yeah.
Food's always good.
Pizza with the number.
The healthy events at Bar Hill.
Yeah.
So far, every event I have been there. And I used to
Tourism.
work for them, so. I used to work for them, so I got an in. I'm afraid I get some feedback, thank you, some feedback around, alcohol and education. Oh, that's possible.
So Grant estimated 60% for the rest of the school year, which is that 10.5 you see.
Okay, so so going back to the previous conversation, it would be about 10,500 from our fund balance for the, part-time guidance data support.
Coordinator?
That's
Which is
well
60%
spent to
of
get
the
the guidance
salary?
department.
I'm
spent.
sorry? Which is 60% of the
0.5,
salary?
it's a 0.5.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I was gonna say.
Sorry, Grant. We almost let you go.
And Grant, our current fund balance is what? I think I have. No, I think I have one of our last ones.
I'm thinking it was like just about 1.1, between 1.1 and 1.2 million.
Yeah, like 4.95% of the budget right now.
So we can probably handle this.
We can I move
Yeah.
that we approve fund balance expenditure of $10,500 to hire the 0.5 data person to staff the guidance department.
Do you have a
Second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.
Okay, so we won't commit the money, like officially committing it like I've come back before, but we'll just use fund balance to cover it as we come in a little over. Great.
Thanks, Grant.
Thank you, Grant.
Go on, drive safe. Yeah. Could I borrow this tricks to buy children? Yes, it is an excellent, I made my husband read it. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it.
I'm sure I will. Thank you both.
Anybody who's busy.
Great. Thanks, Ebony.
Nope, and I don't know if the store will open.
Practicing it ladies. And how do you have this system for your email inbox? It's through the I have like 800 things in my inbox.
Oh.
It's the book.
David Allen.
Right now, my inbox has like 15 things in it, and it's stressing me out. So it's totally changed my inbox productivity. And my task list, and the way Anna and I work together.
You need to consolidate.
I'm telling you, Bridget, you need the book. The book is life changing.
Which book do you rely on?
This one, the five choices for extraordinary productivity.
Oh yeah. I use David Allen Getting Things Done. His
Oh, I have that one too.
Yeah.
I have that one too.
his email system has helped me.
Well, maybe that's a good thing to just ask you to comment on, because it's one of the hardest things to do.
It is, so one of the big changes I made this year is moving things to a task list in my calendar. So when you have those like 15, oftentimes things don't work out exactly. And you finish a task and you have like 15 minutes before a meeting, and you have that time, and so it's either go on Facebook, right, or it drives me straight to what's on the task list that I can accomplish in this period of time. Right, and so it helps me check things off where it's like, even if it's just something I need to read that the AOE sent out, I put it on my task list, and then I know, so my task list is a whole lot longer than it used to be, but that's okay, because I know that the things I'm gonna accomplish when I have the snippets of time to do it. Like today, the IA, or the support staff meeting got canceled from 3 to 4, so it was immediate, now I can immediately say what's on my task list to get, because I have an hour now, right? That I can accomplish. So that has definitely changed. I've color coded my calendar, although I was better at the beginning than I am now. So Anna knows that, and she's getting better too, because she knows me more. When somebody comes in and says, "Does Libby have a free moment today?" and I have a booked calendar, she knows that some of it is like prep time. It's board meeting prep, or it's prep time built in there, and she knows like, yeah, she can probably take 15 minutes from that piece, based on colors and just what it says in my calendar, so it helps me be more productive. been definitely a change for me this year.
So I guess since it's on here, I'll go back and ask about public relations to say, I've heard nothing. I think that's a good thing. I wonder what the rest of the board is about.
I mean, the main thing I've heard
Superintendent in
about
general.
is the gym as of late from
A certain individual,
more than him. There's a number of
a certain
Oh,
individuals.
use of the gym?
there's a group that's more than and they have been calling, or when I run into them places, like talking with me about it. They're people I know. So
I mean, I feel like that's a budget issue and that's a board issue, and it's not really a superintendent issue. I mean, we could put as much money in the budget that we wanted to.
No,
Because
I'm
it
talking
needs to
about.
have the gym be open, but
Oh.
we didn't.
We did.
Well, also, when people complained about the gym last year, the schedule was unreal. If you've
Schedule
ever
is unreal.
gone in and met with Tracy and looked at the schedule, everything is like super duper scheduled, cross-scheduled, over-scheduled.
Yeah.
It's
It's
I-
basically Tracy's full-time job right now.
managing all of our facilities, yeah, and all of the community groups that are trying to reserve the facilities.
Yeah, Anna could probably speak to that because I don't wanna put you on the spot, but Tracy was just on vacation and Anna took that over, so she had for that week.
Yeah,
But-
she's working with the school admins, all the school's calendars are organized a little bit differently. It's gyms, it's classrooms, it's many, many calendars, multiple people within our district coming in and asking for time, and then the community too.
And they're
It's a
all
lot.
booked all the time.
They are, they're completely booked. That's a lot of shuffle for our own staff. Every day we're coming in and asking Tracy in person because it's that much of a shuffle daily.
Well, thank you, Libby. This is super thorough and very informative. I think we are executive session time. We want to add one more item to the agenda.
I'll make a motion to accept this,
Do we need to
superintendent's
oh, that's right. We
in
need to
here, cause I
accept
took
that.
it off
Thank
the
you.
consent agenda, thank you.
Second?
A second.
Favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So, remind me of that. Executive session, and we want to add one more item to the executive session to figure out what the exact wording was.
That's discussion of public
Official.
thanks.
Yeah. So we'd have to, in addition to contract negotiations, we need a little thingy for contract negotiations, as we all know. Also add, discussions of evaluation of a publication.
That doesn't need a finding, right?
No.
Okay,
But we
so
do need
I
a
move
finding
that
of
we
contract.
find that discussing contract negotiations in open session would put the board at a substantial disadvantage.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And then a motion to move into executive session for those two purposes.
So the two
Second.
purposes
Two
being contract
purposes.
negotiations and evaluation of a publication.
Yes. Second?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.